I had the distinct pleasure of picking up one of my really true heroes. Well, probably one of your true heroes too. And I picked him up at the airport in Boston a couple of years back, and we had a chance to chat in the car on the way up and stop for lunch and, you know, all that kind of thing. So I got to now know him not so much as Dr. Ron Paul or Congressman Paul. I got to know him as Ron. And I asked him today, just a few minutes ago, I said, what do you feel comfortable? How would you like me to introduce you? And, you know, what have you? And he said, whatever. He said, I like Ron the best. So with no further ado, I'm going to stop talking, and here's Ron!
Time I have to compete with the person that introduced me. Usually the previous speaker, but now I have to compete with him all the day. But it is a real delight to be here. Before I get started, I do want to introduce, before he runs out, Kent Snyder's walking over there. He's on the staff, and he came with me. And the reason I introduce him is because I call him the instigator. He's the one that leaned on me and pushed the pressure to finally come around to agreeing to at least set up the exploratory committee. But you know, that came off fairly well, but it didn't come off exactly as was planned, because the committee was set up, but it was not supposed to be known right away. We were supposed to have a website and some staff in place. And it got on the internet. The one thing that was very impressive, it spread rather quickly over the internet, which is good news. But it was, to me, rather amazing. And this is our first trip up here after the exploratory committee was established. We got here on Thursday. And I really have a lot of reservations about what's going on and what I should do and how I can help in the freedom movement. But it was amazing to me that in that very short time, I knew how fast things moved on the internet, but it was amazing to me that we arrived here just a couple weeks after we announced, and there our slogan was on all the license plates. It's a great slogan, and it really is typical of what we believe. We should live free or give some sacrifice. But you know, I'm looking forward to the day where we can turn that into a little more optimism. Say, live free and live. But it has been with a lot of reluctance, and I'm still struggling with it. Because I think there are some downsides to doing something like this at a national level and you do poorly. If I'm the wrong candidate, or our numbers aren't strong enough and we don't raise enough money and we do poorly, it could have a psychological effect that we're really on the fringe. And I don't believe we are. I think the people are out there. So mulling this over in my mind, I was thinking about this up here in the last couple of days. And I got to thinking, you know, coming to New Hampshire gives you an opportunity, obviously. You know, it's different, it's small. The number of people are just slightly over, no, it's about twice the size of my district. 2 congressional districts in a state that is leaning in our direction, and you know, it's just a wonderful opportunity. So I got to thinking, you know, if this exploratory committee doesn't go well, maybe I ought to consider moving here and running for a statewide race. I'm just kidding. No, I think it's just great what's happening up here, and it's great to be here. And, you know, I give a lot of speeches down in Washington, but the saying goes, you know, nobody's there and nobody claps. So I'm glad to come and visit with you once in a while, you know, for applause. Because our message is powerful. That's the part that I'm very, very confident about. We have a powerful message, It's the message the country needs, and it's the message that you all have been working on and delivering, and it's coming of age. It's not a new message. It's relatively new in the sense of all of history, because most of history, peoples lived under tyranny, and still the world basically lives under tyranny. And this country is coming closer to that every single day. And yet, though, if you look on the positive side of the freedom movement of all of history, it's been just several hundred years old, and principally oriented around our country and our Constitution. And if you look at all the wonderful things that have happened to man, the progress made, and the advancement and the standard of living has come, and it's paralleled with the advancement of the ideas of individual liberty. And it always amazes me that when you think about it, how do we lose these arguments? How is it that we have the greatest argument, and it emphasizes the importance of the individual and the rights of the individuals. It creates the most prosperity, and yet we tend to lose the arguments. I mean, statism rules. Whether it's at the federal level, at the local level, it's always, I can moan and groan about what the federal government's doing, but right here, they're telling you what you can do in your house and in your own restaurant, and telling you what your habits should be. So we're moving, we're trying to buck the tide. There's still a lot of people pushing us that way. At the same time, our numbers are growing, and we're trying to stop that movement away from liberty. The challenges are very great. I've been involved probably for more than 30 years, and I can see the difference. And it's all to be all in the direction of being optimistic, because in the 1950s and 1960s there were very few organizations, and I had to struggle to find a book that would help me along in trying to understand what libertarianism was all about and what freedom was all about. And I came across a book like Hayek's Road to Serfdom, which helped me a lot and introduced me to Austrian economics. But then I came across a little booklet I'll bet almost everybody in this room has read, and that's Bastiat's The Law. I mean, that's a great book. Trouble is if you go to Washington, and I ask my colleagues, how many of you ever heard of Bastiat the Law? Very few have. So it is a struggle. But Washington is not the place where you go to fight the battles. You have to change people's opinions and values and send the people to Washington to have a different opinion. And that is happening, generally speaking, but I don't think we know what will happen in the next 6 months or 6 years in our own country, and whether or not we will win the fight or whether we will be pushed aside. And it is getting tough, because the more successful we are, the more authoritarian they are going to become. They would like to close us down if they could. They don't want to hear from us, because if they do hear from us, if the people do hear our message, I believe they'll vote for us. I really do. But I think we have lost so much over the years, mainly because that we haven't competed well with the opposition, who has the advantage of saying to everybody, vote for me and I'm going to take care of you, and it's not going to cost anything. And a lot of people believe it, and a lot of people still do. And in some ways, so far, it hasn't cost a whole lot, because we have a system of government where we tax a bit, we borrow a lot, and then when we still don't have enough, we have the luxury of just printing the rest. And the news that I have to deliver is it's coming to an end. It won't last. There will be something to replace it. I believe we're closing in on a day similar to what was happening in 1989 with the Soviet system. We don't have nearly the problems that the people had living under Soviet communism. But there are some days, there are some people I know they feel that way, and at least most of us share the view, if we don't do something, we're going to continue to move in that direction. But in 1989, there weren't very many. There's an occasional one now that claim they predicted what would happen with the collapse of the Soviet system. But if you look at economic analysis, if you look at what Mises said, he told us many, many years before that that the system would collapse, that socialism, communism does not work because it's seriously flawed. And once they ran out of their wealth, they consumed their liberties, and it just folded magnificently. It just folded. Had been threatened by their nuclear weapons, and we had nuclear weapons aiming at them. And throughout the Cold War, there was true danger of a serious nuclear conflict. I was called to the military in 1962 during the Cuban crisis. And yet, the whole thing just collapsed because their philosophy was a failed philosophy, and it was doomed to fail. And yet today, not many people look at our system as being any way similar to what was happening in the Soviet system. Like I said, it's not identical to it, but the principles are there. The principles of authoritarianism, just because it's softer here than it was when the Soviets were in charge, but it's just as seriously flawed economically as was the socialism. The welfare state and the warfare state and empire building cannot last. It always fails. History is replete for the number of times this has failed, so this too will fail. And that is what we should look at as an opportunity to replace it with American views, the Constitution, limited government. And those views were not perfect. The Constitution was not a perfect document, obviously, and it still has some flaws. But it was the best, still is the best, if we at least followed it a little bit. But we don't follow it. So we have two problems. We have trying to make the rule of law as perfect as possible, but more importantly, I think, is trying to get those who are in charge to follow it. And I think this is something that has happened in a serious manner in Washington. There is no rule of law. There is no respect for the Constitution. And if we did, even with its flaws in it, the Constitution is very libertarian. If we followed that, we could not only have prevented so many of our problems, we could still solve so many of our problems. So it's unfortunate that we don't look to the Constitution. But just to give you an example of the attitude that many members of Congress have with the Constitution, I can tell you about what happened when I was trying desperately to keep our government and our Congress and our president from getting into another no-win ridiculous war. And when that resolution to give the president the authority to go to war came to the International Relations Committee, I strongly objected. I objected because there was no national threat to our security, which they claimed, and also the other major reason for this illegal transfer of power to the president was the fact that we had to enforce UN resolutions. And so I emphasized that, but I made the point in the committee. I said, if you members of the committee believe that we should give this power to the president to go to war when he pleases, why don't you live up to your responsibility and make a straightforward decision on whether or not we should declare war? So when I introduced the substitute, I told them I have to depend on you to defeat it because I'm going to vote against my own substitute. And they said they would guarantee that they would. There was a type of debate, and the debate essentially went this way. The chairman of the committee, Henry Hyde, said that that part of the Constitution was anachronistic. We don't follow it anymore. Tom Lantos of California, the ranking member, admonished me and said what I was doing was frivolous, bringing up the Constitution. And then somebody else took to the floor and said that I was misconstruing, although I was a good constitutionalist, I was misunderstanding the conditions over there because I had made the statement that we had never been attacked by Iraq and we shouldn't be attacking them. And the gentleman that brought this to our attention said that I was wrong because the Iraqis had been shooting at our airplanes for 10 years. We've been over there bombing them for 10 years. They've been shooting. They never hit one, and therefore they were still a threat to us. But that is the type of respect that they have for the Constitution. So whether it's the entitlement programs, the Democrats aren't bashful about entitlements. The Republicans used to pretend they were against it, but now they are big government conservatives. They're for compassionate conservatism, you know. And of course, to me, the only thing that is compassionate is liberty. I brought it to their attention, the fact that they brag about their compassionate conservatism when we had a debate on medical marijuana. And I mentioned that there are some people who actually believe that there are sick people, people who who are on chemotherapy and paraplegics and other conditions actually might get some benefit from marijuana. And I said, if you're compassionate enough, why do you endorse laws that will literally put these people in prison and they have never committed a violent act? And we need not do this any longer, and we are at a stage in our history where we ought to abandon this whole war on drugs. But this makes a lot of them nervous, and they said, how could that be? How could we ever have a nation? Has it ever been tried where there were any? I said, yeah, I think there was one time. I think it was in America. There were a few years, like 150 years or longer, where there were no laws. And they said, well, how did it work? I said, well, individuals made their own decisions. Rather radical idea, one that is more appropriate every day and one that people are listening to and they will look to in due time, and I think that time is fast approaching. This last election did not go well for Republicans. They're big spenders, they pretend to be small government people, and yet they endorse entitlements and the deficits explode, and they care not a lick about our personal liberties and our personal privacy, and they have undermined it, and the people are sick and tired of it. But I do believe, and I have had this reinforced being up here, that probably one of the most significant issues in the last election is that of the war that is going on. Another no-win war where Americans are dying needlessly. And this to me is an important issue as I am running or possibly running and becoming a candidate in a Republican primary to take on the established leadership in the Republican Party. And you said, there's no way. What kind of traditions do the Republicans have for being opposed to war? Well, you know, if you study history, a lot better than the Democrats. The Democrats pretend to be the anti-war party, but neither party really under today's condition are determined to be anti-war. There's a lot of talk, a lot of rhetoric on non-binding agreements, but when the bottom line comes on whether or not you're going to vote against the spending for the war, they all cut and run. But if you look throughout the 20th century, you will find that the Republican Party has actually been the beneficiaries of being on closer to the pro-peace movement than the pro-war. Because if you think of World War I, a war that was absolutely unnecessary for us to enter into and would have prevented so many problems throughout the 20th century, the bad peace and the conditions in Germany that led to World War II, and on and on. I have to vote for Wilson for being one of the very worst presidents we ever had. But we have to challenge the public school system on that one because we've all been taught he was the greatest president we ever had, or one of the greatest. But think of 1913, a bad year. You know, a bad year. Here we are, income tax. Let's get rid of that. And Federal Reserve, 1913. Let's get rid of that. Yeah. And what about the popular election of senators that changed in the 17th Amendment? Let's get rid of that. But it was during the Wilsonian era that the idealists said that it was your responsibility, our responsibility as citizens, to make the world safe for democracy. And just think of the lack of safety and the amount of killing that has gone on since we have adopted that policy of our responsibility for making the world safe for democracy. But that didn't go well, and the League of Nations didn't go well, and the Republicans came in and actually benefited from the bad policies of the Wilson era. And then again, World War II combined with Korea. It took Eisenhower to come up and say, look, there was a problem with the military-industrial complex, and decide, if elected, I'm going to go to Korea and stop the war. And then once again, Johnson and Kennedy, they get us involved in another no-win war where we ended up losing 60,000 soldiers. And then again, Republican Party took over under the guise of wanting to stop the war. Of course, they did a lousy job doing that. But then, more recently, we have a president now who in the year 2000, what was his campaign on? A humble foreign policy. Do you think he's humble about our foreign policy? So we have that, and also he decried the fact that that we should not have nation building and we shouldn't be a policeman of the world. And the people responded, and he was elected. And then, of course, immediately something else happens. So it is not so many, and this is one of the toughest things for me to sell in my own district. In Texas, in my district, there's still a lot of people strongly supportive of the president for emotional reasons. So I had to work hard for re-election last time because I had a new district, and there was still a lot of support for the president's policies. But that doesn't mean that Republicans can't be educated to the point and reminded of just a few years ago that you can be a Republican and not support war. You can actually go back and study the old right and even look at Robert Taft, who advised that we not even get in NATO, who was strongly opposed to the draft and didn't want to move into World War II. And they advocated these positions, and they weren't strange to the Republican Party. So whether we work in the Libertarian Party as total independents or the Republican parties or whatever, I believe there's a fertile field out there for our message that the Constitution is very clear on the issue of who decides we should go to war or not, and we should all be comfortable by taking that position regardless of which party we're in, that it's absolutely unnecessary to fight these wars that makes no sense to us. Probably one of the most significant change in attitude about our foreign policy in the last several years, because it's been blatant, it's in the open, it's been announced, and it seems to have been accepted by the American people. And that is now, it is our official policy that preemptive war is correct and moral and justified. That to me is a really sad story for our country to have gotten to that point. So we have a large task before us because they have a bully pulpit. And we have a lot of candidates now thinking about and toying with running for the presidency. And they have a lot of money. See, I don't believe that I am going to be getting very many donations if I were to become a candidate from the military-industrial complex. I think we would be getting very few. So they're big bucks. The candidates are on where they call the top tier candidates, plan to raise more than $100 million. Let's just hope that our movement is alive and well, and that our message can be spread, and we can get not only have influence on the president's race, but in many other races as well, with using our brains as well as our brawn to get on that internet and spread our message so we can undermine and undercut the money that controls our politics. The very first time I ran for Congress was in 1974. And the issue that drove me at that time was the issue of the weakness in the economy. I mentioned that I had studied Austrian economics in the 60s, and as a medical resident, as a physician, that to me sort of became a hobby of trying to understand how the economic world worked. And there were predictions by those who were in the who were writing about economic policy then in the 1960s, predicted the breakdown of the Bretton Woods Agreement, which meant that we could not sustain the gold standard with this artificial pricing at $35 an ounce. In August 15th of 1971, there was the breakdown of the Bretton Woods, which confirmed so much of what I had read and studied, and they were absolutely correct. You just can't print money and fix the relationship between dollars and gold forever. The market is stronger than all the governments, and the market is stronger than all the central banks, and eventually truth wins out. This interested me. I ran for Congress on a lark, and my wife warned me. She said, "Don't do it because it's dangerous." She says, "You could get elected." But I convinced her that it wouldn't be possible because I was going to tell everybody the truth. And she says, "You'll be surprised. The people will want to hear the truth." And she was very sincere. And she was more optimistic or more concerned, maybe, than I was, because I have always been slightly pessimistic about my abilities and my chance of raising the money and ability to compete with the others. So I, in some ways, have shortchanged the people, believing that you have to do what they want. You have to promise giveaway programs and all the things that the conventional politicians do. So my goal after finally being elected in 1976 was not only run on a serious platform, but to stick to what I said after I got there. To me, it meant nothing. I had no desire to be in office if I had to cave in and pander and say the things that one thinks each individual group wants to hear. So I was elected back when I was reelected again in 1997. I essentially got a total agricultural district. I had 22 counties and no large cities. And of course, I had a position that was rather challenging. It was the position that said, I never have and never will vote for a farm subsidy. So, and once again, I thought that would be a difficulty. But you know, we were able to explain our positions about the things that the farmers like. They are independent people. They don't like taxes. They don't like the EPA. They don't like the BATF. And they don't like inheritance taxes. And on you can list these things. But they knew the one thing I disagreed with them. And you know, the organizations, the farm organizations, never forgave me, always campaigned against me. Even now they do. But the farmers, the individuals, you can appeal to them on principle and tell them where you stand, and then they'll say, at least he tells us the truth. So it is a challenge, but as while I was in the Congress in the 70s, I was on the banking committee. I've stayed on the banking committee, which is financial services, ever since, because I have been fascinated with and very interested and convinced it's the issue of the day that is most ignored. Although I see foreign policy as a serious threat and the entitlement spending as a serious threat, that the money issue is a big issue and it's eroding our standard of living already today, and people don't know why. And there are so many people today who want something done, but generally the concern for the poor and the middle class comes from the liberal who said, well, we need to tax this group more, and we need more redistribution of wealth, and we need to mandate a minimum wage upward to solve these inequity. And that's a monetary phenomenon. The monetary phenomenon also affects our trade, our imbalance of trade. For instance, if we get to print gold, which is the reserve currency of the world, and the world still trusts the paper, and we can spend it overseas, why should we go to work and have manufacturing plants here? You know, it's much cheaper just buying stuff overseas as long as they're going to take our paper. And it's a good deal. It's a better deal than anybody realizes in Washington, because some know there's something wrong with this imbalance, and of course they want to regulate the trade and not let you buy cheap tennis shoes from China. And that is their answer to it. But the economic answer will come, and that is that you can't print money forever. the world eventually catches on, and they're going to find out that this is a funny money system, and that although all world currencies are paper currencies, the dollar is the principal reserve currency, and it has a great deal of significance. Jim Grant, a favorite of mine who writes the Grant Interest Rate Observer, was down testifying the other day, and he said something that I agree with entirely, that we are in a situation today unknown in the history of man because there's been a lot of inflation. We know what inflation is all about, and we know about collapses of currencies, and the end of the currency comes rather quickly, but we know about the peso and the German mark and the Argentino peso. We know what happens, and it's happened so often, but never in the history of man has there been a single currency worldwide that's being used to support paper currencies all over the world, and there's no sound currency. Except the market has an answer to that, and the Constitution has an answer to that, and that is constitutional money, which is gold and silver. There are several reasons why I emphasize this issue, not only for the economic importance, because the business cycle is caused by the central bank, the price inflation is caused, the downturns, the unemployment is caused by the central bank, and the transfer of wealth from the poor and middle class to the wealthy. Just think, people are struggling to make a living in the low middle income class. At the same time, last year there was a single corporation, and I think the name was Goldman Sachs. They passed out $16.5 billion in bonuses. Now, that sounds like I'm resentful about the free enterprise system, but I don't believe they get money and those kind of funds out of capitalism. They get money on Wall Street and in the banks because the money's created there. The government creates the monetary base, and then through fractional reserve banking, the people who get the credit first accumulate the wealth, and they make the wealth, and by the time you and I get to spend the money, our cost of living goes up. And then they say, well, don't sweat it, it's only going up 2% a year. What individual now that goes to the grocery store and has to pay doctor bills and education bills and buy gasoline at the pump or pay taxes, and they claim it's going up at 2% a year? So it's a vicious tax placed on us. Those economic issues are very, very important. And that's eventually the thing that will call the attention to that, and people will become aware of it. The big question is will they blame the right thing? After the Depression, when the Depression hit, they never blamed the Federal Reserve. They blamed the gold standard and capitalism and too much freedom. We needed more regulation of the market. We needed more Federal Reserve support of the paper money system. But that to me is critical on what they blame. But the other reason, and this probably is a strong reason for me why I think the fiat system, the paper money system, the money created out of thin air is so evil and wicked. It's a sinister tax, and the transfer of wealth, that's immoral and sinister. But really, this is the way big government is financed. And there are some who understand this very clearly in Washington. Most of them don't have the vaguest notion about it. And they don't have an understanding, they don't care. They just sort of think the Federal Reserve is over there someplace. If we have deficits, the Federal Reserve wants to keep interest rate at 3% or take it down to 1%. Somehow or another, they can do it and they'll make everything okay. But when we in the Congress we spend money over my strong objection and an occasional no by myself. To spend the money to get reelected. So any entitlement is sacred. Any increase in financing of medical care or education, they're sacred. You can't vote against it. Any war that is declared, whether it's a military war or war on drugs or war on poverty or war on illiteracy, it's always the money is there. Republicans run on making government smaller, getting rid of the Department of Education, and what do they do when they finally get control of everything? They double the size of the Department of Education. But what would happen if they couldn't print the money? They could tax us, and matter of fact, if we really want to bring this thing to a halt, if they taxed us every single thing necessary to pay for all the bills, there would be a real good tax revolt. So this convenience of inflating and delaying the payment is convenient for them.
to use that technique. But you know, the other thing that we could do if we wanted to call attention to the fallacy in the tax system is I've made a suggestion that what we ought to do is have a very, very strict rule in the House of Representatives and in the Senate that no member of Congress can have any help in filling out their tax return. And that they had to do it on April 15th, and they had to go to the House floor, and they couldn't leave until it was done. And I think they would change the tax law before they would get that done. So, and the other suggestion I made, which would emphasize the real cost of government, is let's do away with withholding. You know, this idea add it up, balance the budget, send everybody a bill every 30 days and say, this is your share to run the world and pay up. You know, that would end this tax system and this spending system within a month as well. But, you know, the spending, some like the empire, and if you're not for the empire, then you're unpatriotic and you don't support the troops. So you have to, you know, vote for that. And some like big government on this side and some like big government on this other side. And they can't tax enough, and it's an unpopular tax, which is okay, and I don't obviously ever vote for increasing taxes, and they borrow a lot. We only have to borrow about $3 billion a day to pay our to take care of our current account deficit. And if it's any wonder that it's not me alone, I have people coming up to me on the street, average business people in my district, telling me they're frightened about it too. It's not like they're not unaware of it. The people that seem to be unaware of it are those people that are thinking about running for the presidency. They never talk about it. But you know, they just believe that this can go on forever and that the borrowing will last. And the other thing is that they can't borrow enough, then they just print it. But what I see happening is that this will come to an end. There will be a loss of confidence for some reason. Tomorrow, there may be a bombing run over Iran. A totally disastrous, unconstitutional, evil thing to do to the world. It has not even been taken off the table that they could use nuclear weapons in such an event. And somebody else might do it, and yet it'll be done with our money and our airplanes, and we'll be blamed no matter who does it. But there are plans on the table for this. And an event like that could be something that would cascade into a lot of financial events because it's unstable. And then the dollar is going to get in big trouble. In the 1970s, when I had concerned for what was happening, the admitted government inflation rate went to 15%. Volcker comes in to save the dollar, not to save the people, take interest rates to 21%, mortgage rates were 17%. And I'm not so sure they can do that again. And that there could be a panic out of the dollar, and the ball game is over. The ball game is over, and we really have a job on our hands. But our job is getting easier every day because our message is getting out. We have to have concrete answers. We have to have positive answers. We have to know that freedom works, that people, if they go back to work, and you don't have the nanny state, that lo and behold, somebody might just get medical care without the government. It's already proven that you can get educated without the government. People who homeschool and go to private schools in spite of all the taxes they have to pay for public school. So the alternatives are there. In the monetary issue, we don't have to turn off the lights at the Federal Reserve in one day, which under today's conditions would cause chaos and a mess. All we have to do is legalize the competition with the Federal Reserve. It's sad that we'd have to legalize it once again because under the Constitution it's legal. Constitutional money is gold and silver. But today, what to really have that take off would be to eliminate all sales taxes and all capital gains taxes on gold and silver so that you can use it as money in payment of debt. This would go a long way. The reason why I like to come to groups like this, not only because you applaud, but because we can emphasize the very important issues and you're determined to help. All our activities should be designed to promote liberty with the full confidence that the freer we are, the more prosperous we're going to be, and the happier we're going to be. And it is when we turn these responsibilities over to government. If we turn the responsibility over to government to take care of us, to make ourselves healthier, and to turn the economy over to the government to make the economy fair, and turn the responsibility over to our government to police the world and make the world more democratic and more like us, none of that can be done without taking away your liberty. And, you know, we don't depend on our safety by the government. I mean, if you live in a rural area, and there's a few rural areas in New Hampshire, there's a few in Texas, do you have policemen out there guarding us and protecting us? No, they don't come into our houses because they think that we might have a gun. So we're most of the government guns and the protectors and those laws. In the inner city, they have all the laws against the drugs and against the guns, and all the policemen are there, and that's where all the violence and the killing is. So the government can't protect us very well. That doesn't mean they don't have some role. I believe in national defense and a few other things, but personal safety really depends on the individual. So the idea that we have to sacrifice so much under the guise of what is necessary to protect us from terrorism, we need to understand why terrorists are anxious to come here. People say, Ron, you're completely wrong. And I get some radio shows that might agree with our message completely, and they say, we've got to go over there and fight them there because we don't want them over here. I think it's a great fallacy in that logic, mainly because they came over here because we were over there. If you read carefully what Osama bin Laden, our former partner in crime, says, he says, we want you over there. He couldn't believe we would go over there and invade 2 Muslim countries. His recruiting has gone up spectacularly. There never had been any Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now they have free reign in Iraq. And they plan to bleed us. They don't want that war to end. I mean, the worst thing that could happen to the Al-Qaeda is to be walked out of there. But they want us over there. They don't have to come over here. They can pick us off over there. And there's one reason why the enemy, and they are our enemies, want to kill us, and that is occupation. We occupy their territory. It would be like the Chinese had their navy in the Gulf of Mexico and had bases in New Hampshire and in Texas, and they think we wouldn't pull out our gun and do some shooting. The American people won't see it in that light. We are good and wonderful and perfect, and we are only going to deliver our goodness to them. And we have two suggestions to the people that we try to do so much good. We go over and we tell them, you do it our way or we're going to bomb you. And then if they do it our way, we subsidize them. What about the alternative of neither bombing nor subsidizing and trying to get along with people and talking to people and trading with people? This demonstration of the advice that the founders gave us is Vietnam. What a tragedy. 60,000 deaths, and then we lose. We walk out, it was illegal, unconstitutional, undeclared war. We walk away from it, and what has happened? The country has become unified. Was there a domino theory and they all become communists? Communism failed, and they're westernized. We trade with them. We're over there now investing there. I mean, it's so dramatic, and yet we never seem to learn. This message is powerful, the message of freedom, that of the free market, and allow people to run their own lives. You know, I believe that one of our problems has been that we have had presidents that want to do too much. And the people in this country like a strong president. And I got to thinking, well, how can I run for an office like this and say, I want to be a weak president? But you know what? The answer to that is we should have a strong president. Strong enough to resist the temptation of taking power that a president shouldn't have. So I want to finish by just thanking you for coming, thanking you for your enthusiasm, thanking you for your organization, and thanking you for your effort to promote the cause of liberty. I do not know what I'm going to do next month. I know today all I'm going to try to do is get on an airplane, worry about next week, and try to get back to Congress on Tuesday night and start voting again. But I don't know what's going to happen in next week or next month. I do plan, if all things work out all right, to be in a debate on April 4th up here. But I do not know what the future will bring. I don't know what the future, neither do you know what the future will bring. Right now, I have to tell you, I have some serious questions about how I can best use my life and use my efforts to promote this cause. But all I can tell you is I will remain very much engaged. Thank you very much.